Hey guys, welcome to the Tim Moen Show. I hope you're doing fantastic. All right, I got something special for you today. Something very serendipitous happened. I have been saying for quite a while now, I don't know if I've ever talked about it on the podcast, but I've been talking about it with friends and my co-hosts behind the scene, people that I've had on the show, saying, I'm really getting tired of just talking to people in my bubble. It's great. I love it. Love preaching to the choir. The choir needs to be preached at sometimes, of course. And I don't mind doing that. But every now and then, I want to have a constructive dialogue with someone I deeply disagree with. What would that look like? We look at all the conflict going on in the world right now, the violence, Palestine, Israel, Ukraine, Russia, it goes on and on. The root cause of that is an inability to communicate constructively. Well, if we can't do that in our own personal lives, how can we do it at the political level? And so I've been trying to figure out, how am I going to do this? How am I going to practice constructive conflict if I don't have anyone to debate with, to disagree with? And, it seems very hard to get people from that I disagree with to come on my show. There's a lot of suspicion, or like, is this a one-upmanship or whatever? But as I'm thinking about this, and literally as that morning I was having a conversation with my buddy about how I'm trying to figure out how to do conflicting or disagreeing podcasts, debates, shift into that space, because I don't think there is that space right now. Right now, what you see out there is just people trying to club each other over the head and make each other look bad. And it doesn't seem like those conversations go anywhere. They're entertaining. They're fun. I enjoy doing them sometimes. But what I'm really thirsty for is a healthy, civil conversation. And I was talking about this with a friend, and lo and behold, someone reached out to me on my page, on the Tim Moen Show page, and said, hey, he was kind of tentative. He's like, I'm a little nervous about this, or that was kind of the tone of his message. But I have this idea. I want to have constructive dialogue with someone who I disagree with. I want to try to see if we can find some common ground, or just be civil. And I'm a communist, and I could tell there's a bit of nerves there. But we reached out. I said, I love it. This is serendipitous. And so, guys, please welcome to the Tim Moen Show, Billy Bob the communist. There he is. Maybe that's a disparaging way to describe someone. I probably wouldn't like Tim the Libertarian very much, although that's what my son calls me quite often. Our Netflix account has me as the Libertarian. It's not Dad, it's the Libertarian. So labels, am I right? Billy Bob, tell me a little bit about why you reached out. Why'd you reach out to me?
Oh, great introduction, Tim. I mean, so I've been involved with debates, on Facebook, communist, libertarian, capitalism, socialism, these kinds of things. The level of discourse just is not satisfying. The intellectual integrity that goes on in those places is non-existent. So I've been thinking for a while myself that, there's got to be a way to have these kinds of discussions in a more satisfying adult way, where, we're not attacking each other, where we're not out to make the other person look bad or feel bad or win. It's not about winning. Communication is it's hard enough to just identify what your point is and to say it. That's hard enough to convey an idea. And we don't need, other obstacles like, not having intellectual integrity can be an obstacle to these kinds of discussions. So It's been a long time, and I've been trying to get people to talk with me, like what we're doing here. It's not easy to find people that are willing to do that. So I did see you on YouTube, and you seem like a great rational individual and somebody that's interested and thoughtful in these kinds of discussions. Like, it's stimulating to you, it's entertaining for you. And it's same with me. Like, these kinds of discussions I feel are important, and maybe even more importantly, they interest me. I'm excited about them. I want to share them. And that way, maybe it's like a religion, these poor religious folks, not to disparage religious folks, but I mean, I was brought up religious. But they have this compunction to, is that a word? I don't know. To share what their ideas are, and get other people to think like them. And I honestly say I have the same problem. I'm afflicted with that same problem. But I think that my beliefs are based on rational, coherent, thoughtful analysis. And I think that the reality of that is missed on a lot of people on the right.
Right. Well, I'm already seeing similarities here, Billy Bob, because I had the same type of thing, a religious upbringing, and then a switch to trying to derive beliefs that were based on rationality, reason, evidence. It's interesting that we kind of had a similar path. I don't know. Was it for you? Like I always struggled with my faith growing up, right? It was always like, I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around some of these things that they're teaching me in Sunday school and in church. I don't, and at the same time, I was also taught that capital T truth is all important, right? Because your beliefs aligning up with the nature of reality determine whether you go to the good place or suffer an eternal torment. And so that instilled in me a hunger to be like, I need to make sure my beliefs are on point because this has consequences. And so a lot of who I am today, I blame on a traumatic childhood in a lot of ways, but I'm also thankful for it because, I'm kind of happy that I developed an insatiable pursuit of the truth. And at the same time, Billy, I guess associate or sympathize or relate, that's a better word, to your desire to proselytize, to preach the gospel of the good news you have there, Billy, because that's the same as me. My mom always taught me to preach the gospel, and that's what God wants you to do. Well, as I lost my faith, I turned to proselytizing whatever it is I believe in now. And so that's a big part of what I do. So I just wanted to put a pin on that and say, look, there's a lot of similarities here already in terms of where we're going.
So kudos to me for reaching out to you because you seem like the perfect person for me to reach out to. So I really appreciate the opportunity. And
hey, Billy, maybe God is at work here, huh?
Right.
Wouldn't it be funny if we both dropped our ideologies and just became Christians and said, yeah.
Born agains.
Yeah. Westboro Baptist born agains. There we go.
They're a little on the radical side.
Yeah, they're pretty on the radical side, but we're radical people, Billy. So that's kind of probably where we're going to go, right?
That's true.
Yeah. So I get now a little bit about why you reached out to me. So it sounds like your journey was kind of similar to mine. It was like searching for kind of a rational way to make sense of the world. Right. You've been taught this kind of what appeared to be irrational way of looking at the world in your childhood through religion. It all came by magic, and there's talking snakes and there's miracles that are magic tricks. But now it's like, okay, as the Bible says, I'm putting away childish things. Now that I'm a man, I need to come up with a rational way of looking at the world. And is that somewhat what happened to you, Billy?
I never really questioned my religious upbringing. I wasn't even capable of questioning any of that. I started questioning political things before I was able to question religious things.
Oh, okay.
I was probably 19 or 20, and I happened upon a book called Israel and Palestine for Beginners or something to that effect. And I just read it, and it was very persuasive, and it just persuaded me that the ideas and the thoughts that I had about the Israel-Palestine issue, not based on any kind of actual determination to do any research, but just on passively absorbing what's out there in the echo chamber. I was totally wrong about that issue. And so that was the first kind of awakening I had that, there's some force out there wanting me to think things that are not necessarily true. And that was about all I got out of that. So I mean, Israel Palestine was the issue I first cut my teeth on. And then, you know, it's been a multi-decade process. I'm nearly 50. And, you know, that was back when I was like 19 or 20. I read that book. And it's only been in the last, you know, decade or so that I've, you know, am fine with calling myself a communist, but
Right.
not a Western communist, not the
Hmm.
typical communists that you see on,
Right.
you know, that, you know, socialist communists. Like, I mean, that's a whole issue about, you know, what is a what, you know, that's a
Right.
whole
Sure.
continuum.
So let me just, so it's clear in my mind, you don't identify with kind of woke, blue haired, social justice, um, communists that the right loves to lampoon and make fun of. Is that fair to
No, that's
say?
a
Or
good point. So a culture, like communism is not about cultural liberalism or cultural conservatism. I mean, communism was
right.
started, you know, Karl Marx, Lenin, Stalin. I
Sure.
mean, these weren't blue-haired people, and they had a
No.
lot of backwards ideas about culture. And like
Sure.
everybody,
I
and
mean, I saw this meme. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's like communists today, communists yesterday, and it shows like today this like this blue haired social justice type weakling, and then of yesterday, and you know, Stalinist, a nationalist, wrestles bears in the Ural Mountains, like just the figure of masculinity, right? The exact opposite. Someone that a conservative today might identify very strongly with, like patriotism to the fatherland, you know, and willing to fight for his nation and stuff like that. So,
I remember you making this point with Manuel a couple days ago.
oh, okay, awesome.
I watched that program.
So you're the guy
I
that
believe
watched
that
it.
was his name, and you made a similar point. So no, and I agree with that. Like, I think, you know, the idea of what communism is. I think there's, you know, there's an idea that I embrace, which is probably different from the idea that most libertarians have in their mind about communism, and what
Right.
most self-identified Western communists would have about communism. I think that's true, which maybe makes this less interesting, because I know people would probably want to hear from the whack job Western communists
Yeah.
that, you know, are the blue haired 40 genders kind of thing. But to
Yeah,
me, that's
well,
got
someone would
absolutely
love to see me just destroy one of those people. You know, I could put up a thumbnail. It could be clickbaity. Tim Moen destroys blue-haired communists savagely. You know, and I could drive some algorithmic increases to my to my social medias. But of course, that's not what we're doing here, Billy, and that's what neither of us have any desire to do. Um, okay, but before we get into like, I want to explore this with you, and I suspect, you know, again, my primary goal here isn't necessarily to debate you or change your mind or have my mind changed, although I'm open to that. Uh, I'm really interested in figuring out for myself how to have a civil debate, how to move forward with it, right? Too, and feel like you're getting somewhere and not like just leaving the room in exasperation and frustration. I can't get through his block, stubborn skull, um, and go from there. So I suspect that this might be the first of several episodes. Like at some point, I suspect I'll want to start debating you and figuring out how to disagree in a way that's respectful and might actually have a chance of changing your mind, and you might have a chance of changing my mind. Because as I said before the show, I suspect one of us is devastatingly wrong, and it could be me. If I'm the wrong one, I need to be changed, and I need to approach the conversation with that level of openness if I expect the same level of openness from my debating partner, my conversation partner here. So that's one principle that I think I want to try to come into these conversations with is that openness, to the willingness to be change my mind if given reason and evidence. I also want to make sure that you, as the guest on my platform, certainly on my channel, has the respect of not feeling um, not feeling uncomfortable or diminished in any way as a person. Okay. I might challenge your beliefs, but I don't want to ever diminish you or call into question you as a person or your character or anything like that. I want you to be a comfortable guest. I'm hosting you. I feel like I'm hosting a guest here, and I want to try to be respectful. And so if I'm crossing the line at any point, please let me know if you're feeling uncomfortable or anything like that. What are your thoughts in terms of how these conversations go forward about how do you, what are some of the principles here or the ways we can have what do you want to get out of this, I guess?
So, I mean, for starters, like you said, I kind of want to model appropriate, productive, satisfying discussion to the best of our ability. And just so, other people watching have an idea about how to engage appropriately with people they disagree with. Like that's number one, because I see there's a lot of real bad faith, worthless kind of interaction going on, between the different ideologies, and that's on both sides. Also, I mean, the whole point is to enjoy ourselves, and I think if we enjoy ourselves, the audience might enjoy it too. So,
Right.
I'm not thin-skinned, and I doubt there's anything you could say. I think I was on. It's interesting. I'm not sure if you've heard of these folks. I was invited on, and they were pretty pretty mean. What was their names? Shoot. Fakertarians.
Fakertarians. Okay, that rings a bell.
Something like that. And there was like a panel of 4 of them or 5 of them
boy.
and me, and they were just on attack mode. Why do you defend ruthless dictators? And I still had a good time, and
Right,
I could,
right.
I tried my best to hold my own, but so having fun's important, and these
Yeah.
things
And by the way, those fakertarians, I think I know who you're talking about. I used to kind of follow that page, but they were just bad spirited, bad energy people. They would attack people that I really liked and that agree with that were libertarians. They should have been on the same side even, and they're attacking them. And I just that energy it's not for me. I look for constructive paths forward, not that kind of clickbaity.
Yeah, I mean, definitely not constructive.
Disparaging.
I mean, that's a definite legitimate criticism.
Yeah.
Of those guys. They're young, and not
Sure.
principled, and
Yeah.
they're just trying to have fun, whatever.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
seriousness, they're not serious, and so
Right.
like I'm serious about my conceptual framework, which I think best explains history and contemporary reality, and I think that fact, I think that needs to be understood. Like I want, everyone to understand things in the way I do. And then once you do that, you might be able to sharpen my understanding. But I see a lot of people thinking they're going to sharpen my understanding
Right.
out of ignorance. And it's like, okay, well, you're not persuasive at all. Like I'm open to changing my mind, to being, but guess what? After, 48 years, the facts, my understanding of them has led me to this, conceptual framework, and you don't have a clue what that is. So why are, what you're saying to me doesn't come anywhere close to being persuasive.
Right.
So
Right. You're attacking a straw man that you built up of me, right? And I'll think that this is a super important point, and I really want the audience to pay attention to what Billy just said there. He closed off his mind to people that strawmanned him, that were arguing against him in bad faith, that were purporting to assuming they knew Billy's frame of reference, his arguments, his reason, his logic, his understanding. They assumed that they knew everything about that, and therefore and they were way off, right, Billy? And so that turned you completely off. It's like, okay, well, I'm not even in this conversation. You're in this conversation with the straw man you created, and I'm just observing it. And what do I do here, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's the kind of thing repeatedly over and over again on a daily basis that I'm engaging with on Facebook. And it's not satisfying after a while. And you have this desire to experience a little bit more than that kind of engagement and discourse. So,
So
but yeah, and I think,
I'm just writing this
yeah,
down right now because what I'm trying to do here, I have this idea of trying to capture, like, more than having this debate. What's interesting to me is how to have this conversation. Like, more than who's going to have the better arguments or come out winning or whatever, if that's a thing. What's more interesting to me is how do we even have these conversations where we're moving forward, and what does moving forward even mean, right? And I think we're getting somewhere now, because this is a super important point you brought up. This is what we call straw manning versus steel manning, right? Have you heard of steel manning?
yeah,
Yeah. And so my goal here, as your so-called opponent, or your interlocutor in this conversation, is to understand your position as good, or maybe even try to understand it even better than you do, before I criticize it and argue against it. And so, to me, that's a very important component of having a civil debate. Like, I don't want you attacking a straw man of me. A lot of people have this idea of libertarians. Oh, you don't care about anyone. You're selfish. That's why you're a libertarian. You just want everything for yourself. You don't care about oppressed people, marginalized people. You have no empathy. You know, there's all these straw mans all the time. And of course, those people are never going to convince me of anything, because they don't know me. They don't know, you know, my heart and my charity and my empathy and how I am in my personal life and what I care about and what drives, my feelings and different things like that. So, and they don't understand my philosophy either. So,
yeah.
for them to poo-poo it and dismiss it and laugh at it, or attack a straw man of it and think they've gotten somewhere, and that it doesn't impress me much, as Shania Twain would say. Okay, so steel manning. I want to write down a couple other things too. Respect the guest. Okay, that's important. And I said one other thing at the beginning too. I think I can't remember what else. But also, the idea of getting somewhere in this conversation to me means, Billy, that that we advance, at least if we don't change our mind, at least we advance our understanding of the other person's position. That would be a win for me. If I could understand your position better, I feel like I'm advancing, that this conversation is moving forward. So I think that's going to be kind of a metric of success as well. And I think it's important to define these metrics and define what we want to get out of these conversations. Because I think a lot of times we go into conversations, especially on Facebook, and I'm guilty as sin of this, is I start, something triggers me and I just start batting someone over the head with reason and logic and this fact and that fact. And I'm like, why am I doing this? Like, what is my goal here? What am I trying to do by doing this? Am I just like intellectually masturbating myself? Am I trying to persuade this person? Because if I am, I'm doing a shit job of it. Am I like, why am I in this conversation with this person? Why am I expending this time and energy away from my family because someone's wrong on Facebook to angrily type this out? And at the end of the day, there's not a good reason. So I really want to be purposeful and conscious of the reason why we're in this conversation and what it's doing.
And I mean, I experienced the same frustration, obviously, on Facebook, and the same thing. And I kind of rationalize it. Like, I think, I might not be, my facts might not be compelling to this particular person, but I lie to myself and I tell me there's a lot of lurkers that are being totally brought on board by my masterful efforts. And
right. Yeah,
so,
yeah. I tell myself that too. I'm like, okay, this isn't for that person. It's for the audience, audience. And I guess, I don't know. I guess there's something to that. Like, sometimes articulating a message to the choir emboldens them and gives them, hope. And there, I don't know if you've ever seen this essay, and I go back to this essay quite a bit. It's by Albert J. Nock. It's from the 30s. It's called Isaiah's Job. And basically, he's talking to this this rising star in the political world in Europe, and I can't remember who it was, but the guys
30s.
like I have, or he's not a rising star. He's a guy that's got it all figured out, right? He's like one of us. He's figured it all out. If the rest of the world would just adopt this and see how good my ideas are, I would fix everything. And so he goes to Knock and says, "Look, I've got this idea." And Knock's like, "Oh, that's a real hell of an idea." And so the guy's like, "Well, how do I implement this? Like, what do I do?" And Knock tells him the story of Isaiah. He's like, "Well, let me tell you the story of Isaiah. Isaiah had a prophecy to give. I can't remember who the people were, but he was like, the God told Isaiah to go out and preach this to the people. He's like, I want you to tell them that they got to change from their evil ways, or there's going to be hell to pay, and you got to do this and that to tell them this and that." And he's like, "Okay." And God added, "I got to tell you something. No one's going to listen to you, but you need to go out there and do it anyway." "Well, why am I doing this if no one's going to listen to me?" He said, "There's a remnant out there, a remnant that will hear your message, that already believes what you believe, but they will be emboldened by it. And those are the people that are going to rebuild society when calamity takes it away. And so those are the people that you're preaching to." And so I often tell myself what I'm doing here is preaching to the remnant and the people that are going to be left
Yeah, no, that's good. The other thing I was gonna say, as far as what I want out of it, I mean, ultimately, I think that the geopolitical changes that are currently taking place are going to really maybe shake society up a bit, and I think it's important that we do our best, that people aren't led astray by whatever false narratives that they're going to be shoving down our throats. And I know libertarians are typically, working class individuals like myself, the same interests, right?
right.
So I guess that's debatable. I mean,
Yeah.
but no, I mean, I think that we all want, access to
No, I mean,
opportunity,
that's the same thing.
prosperity,
That's the
and
same
peace.
thing I see too, Billy, is look, there are nefarious forces at work. Things are crumbling. This is a tenuous civilization that we have. And, we need to be aware of these forces and know how to counteract them. Yeah. And I would suspect you agree with that, but you probably have a different idea of what those forces are and how to counteract them. But yeah, what so far, so good. We want that awareness. Okay. So steel manning, metric. Okay. Well, maybe we should dive in. We're about half hour in. We've kind of laid some of the groundwork, and we're probably going to learn some more things here. I suspect we're going to come up against some obstacles to having a constructive conversation. I don't know what they are, but maybe one of us gets frustrated or one of us just can't. And so we'll have to figure out how to do that. I'm hoping to learn and refine how to have these conversations and practice so that, I get better at it, so that I can proselytize. And hey, wouldn't it be a great coup if I could convert old Billy Bob to libertarianism or vice versa, right? That would be a real feather in our caps, wouldn't it? But that's not my goal here. At the end of the day, I'm just hoping to learn a bit more. So anything else before we get going and just dive into your beliefs? And
not that I can think of off the top of my head.
yeah.
No, I'm impressed, Tim. You're an impressive individual. Your thoughtfulness. So, I want you to convert me. You know what I'm saying? I'm ready.
All right.
But
Prepare to be
you gotta-
baptized, brother.
You gotta make a persuasive argument.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Well, let's dive in. I appreciate those words about me. I'm not. Hey, this is another thing. Hey, feed your interlocutor's ego. It softens them. It lowers their shields. My shields are down. I feel like I'm. Okay. So we'll dive into your beliefs, and I'll probably have a lot of questions about them. And like I said, we're already half hour in. I suspect, I'm coming off a night shift, so I don't know how my cognitive bandwidth is or how much information I can absorb. So that's okay. We'll have more episodes and more discussions, and we'll work our way through this. And as long as it's getting us somewhere, as long as we're learning, and as long as we're.
What about Tim? Just like, from your basic understanding of communism, like, what do you think is the biggest, how would you articulate the biggest concern that you have that makes us different, like that our ideologies are just not like, can you come up with like
Sure.
one big thing, and maybe that's a good way to start, just so I
Right.
know like what you're thinking, and how, these just are not incompatible, and how what I'm thinking is just nuts.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm not sure that it's nuts. There's certainly some things I sympathize with. Um, I'll give you a little history. My great grandparents actually were branded kulaks in Soviet Russia as under Stalin's regime, and they fled, barely got out with their lives, and it was because they worked really hard and they built up they hacked a farm out of the southern Siberian wilderness and made it productive, and they were generous. And I remember, I've got my great grandfather's memoirs actually, and it just like, it's just a journal of him talking about day-to-day life through this time period. It's fascinating to actually see this time period kind of brought to life in a very personal story about how it was literally affecting someone on the ground. And so the thing I share with my great grandfather is this kind of empathetic idea of, to each according to their need, from each according to their ability, right? And that appealed to my great grandfather's Mennonite Christian sensibilities of being charitable. I mean, the Bible commands us to be charitable, and that's a good thing. And then things kind of fell off the rails because, they were branded kulaks because they were flourishing maybe more than some other people. And then as people started to suffer more, and they demanded more and more from them, they saw the way things were going, and next thing you know, guns are coming out, and more stringent demands were being made by the Communist Party, and they saw the writing on the wall and got out just in time. The rest of the family died in work camps. So that's coloring a little bit of my background from communism, because I heard these stories growing up to some degree, right? So I didn't understand what they were talking about. I'm just, Stalin, bad man, communism, bad thing. So there's probably a little bit of bias coming into this conversation I'm going to put up front there based on those stories. But philosophically or practically, I would say I'm just trying to pin down a specific thing that I think a lot of it has to do with rivalrous or scarce resources and how to resolve conflict around them, and who owns or controls what, and what's a universalizable principle around that. And so for example, the idea that I hear from some communists and some left libertarians is rent is theft, right? So I provide a room in my place for someone, and they pay me some money, and somehow I'm stealing from them. Well, theft is a violent act, and you can counteract violent acts with protective force, with violence. If someone's trying to steal from me, I can use force to stop them, and I can use as much force as necessary to stop them. I can escalate, it's got to be proportionate, but as much as is necessary to stop that, I believe I can do that. So the natural sort of consequence of believing that something like a consensual voluntary relationship of me renting a room or renting a property to someone is theft means that they can use violence against me because I'm using violence against them by renting them something. And so this is where I in my brain, I worry about the violence associated with communism, and I mean that might be a good place to start off if
Sure.
that's where we want to go.
Kudos to you again for even entertaining this discussion. I mean, given your historical background. So if you had family members that actually were victims, I'll use the word victims of the Soviet government. I've met a lot of people like that, and they're very flippant with me, and I'm very flippant back. So again, I need to appreciate the humanity there, but there is a context within which is all important, right? The context within which these actual things happened is all important. And I think if one understands the context, one cannot, you don't really say justify, but you understand, what happened and why. And you could even say it's unfortunate that happened, but that I still supported Stalin in upgrading and modernizing the agricultural system, which was prone to famines, repeated famines every time the weather was bad, over and over again. I mean, there was multiple famines in the 1920s, another one in 1930s, and he tried to work with the landowners and the people who were benefiting from this backwards, decrepit agricultural system that wasn't adequate to support the country. And so he had no choice, and he tried to work with them. And so this is my understanding of that context. And so, of course, there's blame.
And if that's true, I guess where my mind's going at, then, like, I try to look at everything. Way my mind works, Billy, is I try to look at everything through kind of first principles and understand why. Okay, so what right did Stalin have to do this? Like, did anyone have that right, or was it just Stalin? And where did he get that right from? And that sort of thing, right?
Yeah. So, okay. So that's another thing I wanted to address was, you want these universal principles.
Yeah.
And, so to me, I am always denouncing and, arguing against this liberal effort to develop a universal principle, because I think that's foolish. I think that it really doesn't help us to understand reality. So I think that the context is all important, and there's no such thing as a universal principle that is going to apply no matter the context. So we have to. Go ahead.
Just to clarify that, is there? Yeah. So I'm trying to understand then, if, like, what is there any, like, place of truth or groundedness that you're operating from, or is it just kind of whatever is pragmatic? I don't know if that's the right word. How do you measure if something's just or not? Against what do you measure that? Or is justice even something you think of?
And these are deep philosophical things, and we can go back to
But I think that's where we need to go, because my libertarianism, at least as I understand it, in my belief, it comes from that deep place, like, and so I need to understand what the measuring stick is here. And so I think I want to understand what yours is, so I can better understand where you're coming from.
I mean, basically speaking, I mean, common sense understandings of morality and justice. And so what does that mean? Again, it depends on the context. So you have to understand the context before you can pretend to have a good understanding of what the just thing to do or what the moral thing to do. So, if we're going to, apply this universalized non-aggression principle, the man with the life preserver on the side of the shore can demand that the drowning man pay him, everything he's worth before he shows it. And that's perfectly normal. Mm-hmm. But again, to me, the context matters. And I would condemn the man that is not violating the non-aggression principle by demanding that the market, can maintain that this life preserver is worth everything you have, motherfucker. You know what I'm saying?
Right. So, would you advocate shooting that man and taking his life preserver to give to the drowning man?
I would definitely wrestle him for it. I would hope, if he was refusing to save that person, I don't know if I'd kill him, but I'd definitely try and take it from him and save that guy. But
that's a context that we're talking about, to me, right? Because what we're doing here is we're saying, okay, context matters. Like, that guy should give him the life preserver. That would be the right thing to do. He's a repugnant person if he doesn't, and he's a repugnant person if he demands money.
Yeah.
But
But does that suggest that maybe a universal approach isn't appropriate?
well, I guess what I mean by universal is trying to drill down to the core principle here. So in the same way that common law courts would try to derive principles of justice by resolving disputes that would come before the courts, and they would build up a body of laws based on precedent, right? Was this a just outcome, or what did it go off the rails? And and over time they would hone in closer and closer on what the principles of justice are. They never get there 100%, but they're aiming for it, right? And so so you're right. And of course, context matters in these things, but there's still a principle to be derived, even if there's context around that principle, right? So a common one that's often used, for example, in libertarian circles to kind of dismiss libertarians is we have a property owner next to me, and I shine a light on his property. Is that am I violating his property rights? Probably not if it's a reflection, but at some point, if it's a 1,000,000 kilowatt laser, it is causing property damage. Now, where on that spectrum between a reflection to a 1,000,000 kilowatt laser is he precisely violating that neighbor's rights? And that's very difficult for a libertarian to answer, other than to say it's on there somewhere. There's a band, and over time we can probably narrow down based on context of past precedents, judgments, how they turned out, whether they come closer and closer to something that can be universally applied, is how I would describe a principle of justice, right? And so
all of those kinds of things.
Yeah. Anyways, so we kind of jumped into context, but I kind of want to understand that. So you said, okay, Stalin did these things. You're not excusing them, but there was historical context around it that helps you understand why he was doing it, or maybe even why it's necessary. In the same way you might say, okay, it's horrific what Hamas did, what they reportedly did, which was massacre a bunch of innocent people. But you could also understand the context in which they're living and how that might motivate blowback. And libertarians are often talking about this, especially with regards to foreign policy, right? Is like, okay, there was some terrorist attacks in Canada where after Harper announced that we're bombing Libya, 2 terrorist attacks that killed people and shot up Parliament. And this was sorry, I don't know if you're I forgot you're American. Harper joined Hillary's bombing of Libya and deposing of Gaddafi, and then we immediately, when he made that decision, we had terrorist attacks in Canada that killed people, and these terrorists cited that decision as their motivation. Now, those terrorists are guilty; they're criminals. But we can also say at the same time that they're criminals, that there was some context around what they did, right? There was things that the government did over here that made it more likely that there was going to be these kind of motivations for people to do these things. And so we can also, while condemning the terrorists, condemn the government. So there's context, and context does matter. And libertarians are always preaching that as well. There's also principles by which we judge that context and judge the actions that emerge from that context. Would you agree with that or no?
I would agree with that. And I'm not sure, my moral principles or my principles of justice would be too different than anybody else's. I doubt they're much different. I don't get into this universalist liberal approach where, hey, I support free speech on principle, period. And that's not true. There's always person, place, or time restraints.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of considerations. So it's and
I agree with you. And this is why, and the reason I don't agree with free speech as a right, for example, is because it is too broad. It's not precise enough. It's like, it needs to be narrowed down. And so, to me, a free speech is just a property right. It's like at my table, you don't have free speech. You can't insult my wife. You can't, be rude. I'm going to kick you off my property. That's my right to do. But also, I can say whatever the hell I want on my property in my own domain without you touching my stuff, taking my stuff, or laying a hand on me. So the same right that allows me to kick you off my property allows me to keep you away from my property when I'm saying stuff. So it ultimately comes down to property right, and that's much more precise. Now you can get into you can get into, I guess, the what are the edges of property, or how do you determine property and all that kind of thing. Maybe I'll do that on your show. But my only point here is there is a line somewhere there. To say that there's no line, or that it's wishy-washy, or however I feel, I think that's wrong. And I don't think you'd agree with that. So I think you'd agree that there's a line somewhere that you generally refer to when you look at something happening in history, and you either agree with it or disagree with it, or you support it or say that was bad. You judge things as good or bad, and there's a standard that you have, whether it's conscious or not, by how you judge those things. Would that be fair?
No, of course. I was going to make the point about, what if your property is a platform of mass communication? I mean, does that give you the right to just spam subversive lies into society? So that's my issue with freedom of speech. Like, freedom of speech doesn't really exist in the United States. They say they do as a liberal right. But then all the platforms of mass communication, and even increasingly alternative media, are tightly controlled and regulated. So they don't allow just any kind of speech on there. So the wealthy get their say, and those of us that disagree with them are marginalized. So that's not free speech.
And Billy Bob, those just to drive home your point too, I agree with you. It's the ruling elite, the establishment elite zeitgeist. If you support that, you get to say your piece on these things, because they are byproducts of that elite system, right? What you might call the capitalist system, what I might call the oligopolist or crony capitalist system, or corporatist system, whatever we call that, or disagree on. It's that elite ruling class system that is determining who gets to speak. And guys like you and me, our speech is limited compared to those that are in good with the system.
They also promote this idea of liberal universal rights, the right to free speech. And then they not only don't actually, do that thing. They don't actually allow free speech, but then they use those rights to attack other countries who are competitors or rivals, and say, oh, look at them, they don't allow free speech like we allow free speech. And then they turn everybody here. So I think this whole idea of championing universal rights outside of the reality of class struggle and oppositional class interests, and how the ruling class, the wealthy elite, creates paradigms in people's minds of, oh yeah, I like rights. I'm for human rights. I'm for speech and all those things. Nice. And we have them here. We're free. So that's really what I'm getting at. So this whole libertarian ethos of we're for freedom. You talk about something a little too broadly defined, like freedom for who? Freedom for who to do what? So let's get to,
and listen, I actually agree with that. I agree with that point wholly. I think the idea of universal human rights was by and large a bad idea. And so that's not what I mean by universal principle. I mean what Chomsky means, in that anything that is, I think he said something like, anything that is moral has to be universal. Like, it has to be, so, but to me, rights are a bad concept. They've been, it's like they're these things that you get. They're these positive things. You have the right to healthcare. Well, what does that mean? That means I have to provide you. I'm a paramedic. Does that mean I have to provide you with healthcare, like at gunpoint, or I'm violating your rights? Well, no. So to me, I use the word rights as a stand-in, because it's kind of colloquial language for a negative obligation, or put another way, you don't have the right is what I normally mean. Like, you don't have the right to sit at my table and say those words. You don't have the right to take my property because I said some stuff. Now, the idea of you don't have the right to take my property or put me in a jail because of words I say is colloquially termed by some free speech. But it's free speech has become this other thing where platforms are obligated to broadcast your shitty opinions, or, you know, that people can speak up in an auditorium when you're trying to listen to a lecturer and engage in protest. No, I don't agree with that. So I just wanted to be clear about those terms, right? And about, I think I largely agree with you about the idea of universal human rights. I think like the Declaration of Human Rights that the UN put out, for example, is silly and contradictory. It doesn't even make sense because of the examples you said about free speech. You know, free speech is, what does that even mean? Like, if we're in a conversation right now, like, I think it makes sense to have rules that when I'm speaking, you don't speak. And when you're speaking, I don't speak. Like, we take turns. Like, we're not both speaking all at once because, you know, anyways.
You know, I think so. Again, that's what's interesting to me. I think we agree on a lot of things. I think we're very similar. And I think, you know, libertarians and communists, again, I think there's a lot of things we have in common. And I think, you know, I think it needs, you know, we need to have more of these discussions. So it's a great discussion. You know, you did ask me a question I haven't addressed. I went around it a really long way. But how does, you know, what gave Stalin the right to do what he did? So that's an interesting question. And I don't really have a ready answer for it. Right. But I do understand that this idea that, you know, what you're really calling into question is the idea of the nation state. And I'm the first one to say, yeah, hey, the nation state is stupid, but that's what exists right now. Like, right. What exists right now is, you know, humanity is divided up, geographical locations with borders, nation states, individual governments representing those people. Is that the best way? No, but that's the reality within which we live. And so, given that reality, that's what gave Stalin the right to do what he was going to, what he needed to do. Okay. So he needed to upgrade and modernize the agricultural system of the Soviet Union, which was prone to cyclical famine. And he actually did that successfully. And it was unfortunate that it couldn't have been done in a different way. But I don't think Stalin gets all the blame for that. But that's my understanding of history.
Okay. Yeah. And I'm just trying to wrap my brain around this. Okay. So is there a standard by which you'd say someone like that has gone too far, or is it kind of an ends justify the means type thing?
Well, I mean, so we'll look at what Stalin, like, in my opinion, Stalin's motives were to benefit the vast majority by, you know, abolishing this backwards agricultural system that was not capable of you know, furthering the kinds of industrial progress that needed to happen in the Soviet Union for it to withstand the impending, you know, fascist invasion, and just the development that was going to take place. So, you know, Stalin's motives were good. And again, I mean,
right. What argument do you get? Do you give, like, when a fascist says Hitler, you know, I don't agree with everything, but let's put this into context. He was trying to do what was best for his people, given the environment. We had horrible conditions imposed by Weimar Republic and the treaties or whatever, the sanctions, and, you know, they had suffered a humiliating, unnecessarily brutal defeat in World War I, led by Western central banks and imperialist forces and all that sort of thing. And so what Hitler did was necessary, or, you know, it was for the good of the people. So like,
Tim, you're going to cut that clip and you're going to be,
oh my God. Yeah. I'm going to be canceled so quick. No, but do you see what I'm saying? Like, would you make an argument against Hitler being, I don't know. Like,
I mean,
I hear I guess the thing I'm getting at, Billy Bob, is I hear similar arguments coming from guys who describe themselves as fascists, talking about singing Hitler's praises a little bit, right? And but
well,
what do you say to those guys?
I mean, there's just a difference. There's a difference in ideology. There's a difference in what they said, and so
Right.
that's
But
why.
but I guess
matters.
that's what I'm trying to get at here, or to really try to hone in on, is
Okay.
what is the standard. And so for example, I heard from you that he was trying to do what's best for the people. He needed to modernize agriculture or something like that, right? That was a necessary thing that he needed to do for, I guess, to brace against the fascists.
Well, to end the famines, to end the perpetual cyclical famines,
and
which was
perpetual cyclical famines, right?
And just to be able to support the industrialization that needed to take place and was going to take place. But
okay, so what how would we encapsulate that then, or what would we say? So he's allowed to be a strong arm and steamroll some collateral damage. Let's say, let's use a military industrial complex term here, to achieve these kind of noble ends or necessary ends. And then I guess the question is, well, how do we know what necessary ends are in advance? And I mean, I guess we're judging it back through the lens of history, and you're able to say with some degree of confidence now, well, those were necessary ends. But how could anyone have known then those were necessary ends? And how would we know what necessary ends are now by some strongman leader like Trump or someone else who comes into power and says, we need to do X, Y, and Z, and there's going to be some collateral damage, but must be done?
It's a good question. I mean, again, I'm always attacking this idea because you presuppose that we should have some universal basis for judging everything consistently all the time. And I think that's just a ridiculous assertion that liberalism makes that has no place in the real world. So that's just a fact of life. Like, you're not going to have any certainty. That's life. You've got to inform yourself to the context. You got to take a side. And I mean, to think that, you can have some kind of philosophy that's going to, predetermine every good or bad thing, from the comfort of your armchair.
Okay. No, that's fair. I just used something you said there, made me think where I was misunderstanding you. You said you need to pick a side. So is it okay?
So listen, here's the two sides. Fascist that says the Aryans are supreme, Jews are subhuman, blacks are subhuman, communists it's just a fucking Jewish plot for world domination. Or hey, workers of the world unite and overthrow the dictatorship of capital. Right. So I think in this country right now, we need to overthrow the dictatorship of capital, because I think that our country is governed, the entire all Western countries are governed by this, the wealthy elites. So I think the same ruling class that we have now is the same one that Stalin was able to ally with against the fascists. But I also think the fascists were the creation of the Western ruling establishment to defeat against the threat of socialism and actual democracy. So given these two forces, Tim, it's not hard for me to choose which force I support.
Okay, let me ask you this. This is context based, right? Sure. And I'm not trying to be cheeky here or anything. I'm just changing the context a little bit. Okay. I'm just changing the context. You're in a prison. You're sentenced to prison, and you have a choice. You can join the white Aryan nation, fascist, Jew-hating, Hitler lovers, or you can join the the black communist workers who hate you by virtue of your skin color. Does that change your equation at all? Like, do you join the fascists, like the gang that's going to protect you from the people that are going to kill you in the prison? or do you join the people that you more closely align with philosophically?
So, I kind of see what you're getting at here. It's like,
Yeah,
do I
well,
let?
what I'm getting at is the underlying principle there would be survival, right? Like, you're probably going to go with the hold your nose and go with like what's going to help you survive so that you don't die.
Yeah, no. So what I would say you're getting at is this idea of, do my own material selfish interests dictate, which side I choose, or do I have an option to maybe not, look at things in my own material self-interest and look at the broader picture and make a principled judgment based on the bigger picture. So I understand that a lot of people that had to have their farms what's that word, expropriated by
Yeah.
Stalin. It wasn't in their material interest to side with Stalin or to go with Stalin's program, and unfortunately they chose instead to go to war with. And again, we're using Stalin as a stand-in for the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. So
Right.
it's just irresponsible to say that these were decisions Stalin was making by himself.
Sure.
So it was an entire entire government, and there was debates, and there was unanimity on the path forward. So it's even there's a declassified CIA thing explaining that Stalin was not a dictator. He tried to resign multiple times and was turned down. But in any event, we tend to just digress to that kind of discourse. But the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, they had an option. They could, okay, well, we're just going to continue with these regular famines, and we're going to continue to live in this non-progressive backwards country that had been basically run to the ground by the czars, where just tremendous poverty, or we have a vision of progress and we're going to work towards this vision. And unfortunately, if you are going to be one of the minority people who aren't on board and are going to fight against us, well, that's your choice, and we're not gonna surrender to you. So that's the thing. What choice did they have? As a responsible government of the Soviet Union, what choice did they have to surrender to a backwards agricultural system and let these, the owners of the farms and the agriculture and livestock, let them keep progress from happening? So again, in that way, that's one of the reasons why I see this whole discourse about anti-authoritarianism kind of inane, because I think that if you're going to be anti-authoritarian, you're going to allow 1%, 0.1%, 0.0001% of the population to hold a veto over any kind of progress you're going to want to make as a government for the vast majority. So I just don't see that authoritarianism is it's even possible to maintain a society without a degree of authoritarianism. And it's not authoritarianism for the sake of authoritarianism, but it's just a necessary component of having laws, which are also necessary for society to function, and law enforcement. So I'm just touching on a lot of the things that I touch on in these groups, but luckily you are a way more patient and a very good listener.
Yeah, I mean, I'm picking up. I'm just trying to pick up. I'm really making a concerted effort here to understand your point of view, and I got to admit, it's kind of challenging because there are triggering things in this, right? Like, my family was almost killed, right? And so where my mind goes is, and I know this isn't what you're doing, but where my mind goes in the conversation is, well, this guy is saying that my family had to die if they stood in the way of Stalin's plans, and that was just something that would have to happen. And that's a hard pill to swallow. That's a hard pill to swallow. I got to be honest with you, that my family is disposable in that way for these plans. I mean, then it raises questions about, okay, well, how do you define progress, and how is this a good thing? And then I guess we could, But I want to stay away from this, and the audience I'm sure is probably screaming right now, like, call them out on the starvation and the agriculture. What I'm trying to do here, audience, is steelman his position. Okay, I want to really understand it, and I'm actually going to assume that he's right about this, and that it was background and there was cycles of famine, and go with that. Because I'm still not convinced that justifies what Stalin did. I don't think it justifies modernize. I don't think it justifies steamrolling a bunch of unfortunate collateral damage, because those were people. And, that then could justify all sorts of evil shit. And how would we argue against it if on the one hand we're saying, well, it's good in this sense, but bad in that sense?
But Tim, what about it's just the suggestion that what's happened in the USSR isn't any different than what happens in every country, every day, everywhere for the last thousands of years. So again,
but this is what libertarians are against, right? I mean, this is kind of the core of our thing, is that the steamrolling can't happen anymore. People can't be means to some historical end or some central planners utopian visions or something like that. Like that is a recipe for disaster and dystopia in our estimation.
Right. But to appreciate what I just said, so to appreciate that that's not really how the discourse goes. That's not really what the discourse is, because the discourse doesn't appreciate and understand that the kinds of things that happened under Stalin are really no different than what happened in every country, everywhere, all the time. So, I mean, maybe not to that extent, but those were unusual circumstances. I mean, it was the first successful, socialist revolution. There's all kinds of extenuating circumstances and context, but the idea that, a minority of people who are materially going to be, their material interests are going to be affected in a harmful way to benefit the interests of the vast majority, the idea that those people should have a veto over progress, I think is to me, it's not anything I'm going to endorse. Like I'm going to take it on a case by case basis. I'm going to look at the context. And so my main context in looking at everything is the context of class struggle. So I remember you talked with Manuel on the last podcast, and you talked about how feudalism gave way to a capitalist revolution. Well, guess who was put out in the capitalist revolution? Well, the fucking feudalists, right? Like, should the feudalists have gotten a pass and said, hey, you're aggressing against us. You can't aggress against us. It's a violation of your own ethos. So there's always going to be a minority who are going to resist progress because they're happy with the status quo, because they're beneficiaries of the status quo. And the point is to progress into a better situation, into a better system that benefits, the vast majority, or that's better in some arguable, way that can be quantified. And so I mean, Stalin undoubtedly did that. Like what the Soviet Union was able to accomplish, I mean, is impressive. And I mean, I know a lot of people are not aware of that, or going to argue that. But and then I think China is the coup de grace, because China did everything that the Soviet Union did, only quicker, and they're still going and they're doing it even better. But that's a whole nother kind of work, Tim.
Absolutely. I mean, you open up a bunch of stuff. I mean, look, I typically don't like to argue or debate I think your understanding of history is vastly different than mine. And now I could have just been propagandized. I might have got everything wrong. It might not have been tens and hundreds of millions of people that died under these communist regimes. Maybe it would have been more if it hadn't been for these dictators that did, or these leaders that did the necessary thing to save their country. And I'm not exactly sure what you're arguing about, but like to me, that's such a, I can't wrap my head around arguing from pragmatism when we're talking about nation states and what they should do. Like, to me, it's just too abstract. I don't understand concrete. So I like to get down to kind of the nitty gritty of things and understand, because you're throwing around words like progress and class struggle. Okay. And those are things I don't know what you mean by those. And I just want to pause you. I'm not asking you to explain those right now, because we're an hour and 10 into this. And what I thought would happen is happening. I'm running into cognitive bandwidth issues coming off a night shift. And we got a ton more to talk about. And we got more episodes in the podcast. So I hope you'll come back on, Billy Bob. I want to pause it here, pause our conversation. I don't want it to end. I've enjoyed this. You've really been challenging my brain here. But I want to come back to you fresh and really dive into some of these things. Are you still open to it? Of
course.
Okay.
No, and I can only give you respect and appreciation for the way you've engaged with me and, the respect you give me. I mean, I understand that these are, definitely outside of the mainstream, and they're tough for people to wrap their head around. But
yeah, it's hard. And maybe maybe part of this too is like, actually what would be I just realized what would be really helpful to me after audience, my plan is to go on Billy Bob's show, and he's going to interrogate me the way I've been interrogating him, and really challenge me.
I'm going to be way less respectful than Tim is.
Okay. You make me a little nervous, but okay, that's just good. But at the end of it, I guess I'm going to be looking for the same feedback I'm offering to give you now about how I received your arguments and how, what are some of the obstacles to me to really understanding and I grasping your position, because I feel like I'm a long way off from that yet. And so I'm not even really ready to debate it at all, because I don't even completely understand it. And I'm having a real hard time understanding it. Some of the obstacles are for me in this conversation, and I'm not saying that these are even necessary things for you to be aware of or to improve on or change. It's just, so when you're bringing up style, I already told you about the things that kind of triggered me when you were talking about style and just where my head goes with that. Right. And then again, some of these things to my normie brain, I'm a normie brain compared to yours. I'm outside your bubble. And so when you start throwing around things like, and then Mao was the pinnacle. I mean, this guy really nailed it home. And I'm like, in my brain, I'm like, Mao, he's the worst of them. Like, what is this guy on crack or whatever? Right. Cause it's so outside of the stuff I've digested in my life. Right. And the messages I've received. And so, I don't know what you can do about that. Maybe what you did was the right way, but it's just something to put a note in and just to be aware of. Okay, I'm having a hard time getting through this and following you because of where my mind works and the way yours is. Like, you're going into these big pictures, things, and I'm just trying to get down to brass tacks. Like, what is ethical, what is moral, and how do we determine that? And so all these kind of flowing terms that don't have clear definitions to me and boundaries, and it's hard for my brain to even wrap around. So that's where I'm leaving the conversation, but I'm intrigued and I'm hungry for more. And I'm confident we're going to make more progress in the next thing. And I think we've laid a good foundation, a good starting point. So thank you for coming on. I appreciate it.
No problem. Let's talk after the show about what time you'll be able to make my podcast. So
awesome. Sounds good. And I'll definitely promote that to my audience as well. Thanks, Billy.
Thank you, Tim.